Every technical decision you make is actually 5 decisions disguised as one. And if you're only evaluating the tech itself, the benchmarks, the features, the hype, then you're ignoring everything else that is more likely to actually affect your product. Let me show you what I think about before I commit to a new tech decision. When I'm trying to decide between multiple technologies, whether it's a language, a framework, a database, or even what IDE to use, there are 5 dimensions that I consider to figure out the trade-offs between the different choices. The first dimension is the obvious one. What are the technical pros and cons? This is the kind of stuff that devs love to argue about. Which tech is better and why? Sometimes the winner in this category is obvious. Like if you're trying to decide what framework to use for a Java REST API, well, you're probably going to be choosing Spring Boot because there's no real competitors there. But usually it's not so obvious, and it'll depend on the needs of your project. For example, should you use a SQL database or go the NoSQL route with MongoDB or DynamoDB? Well, there is no universal answer here. If your project is going to have loosely structured data and you know that data is going to be mainly accessed through its primary key or maybe a secondary key, then going a NoSQL route is going to be great for you. But if you know you're going to have highly structured data or data that needs to have a lot of joins between the various pieces of that data, then you're much better off going with the SQL route for the technological requirements. Another great technological debate between devs is how you should code your front end. Even though React is like the default generic answer for larger complex applications, there's a lot of reasons why you shouldn't be using React in maybe your case, and maybe even just use something as simple as HTML and vanilla.js or another framework. It's really going to depend on the requirements of your particular project. At this step, consider how the different options interact with your technical requirements, but keep in mind that we still have 4 more dimensions to consider. The second dimension is the operational trade-offs of each choice. How much ongoing effort will each choice cost me? An example here would be trying to decide between a cloud SQL solution like Neon or Supabase versus running your own on a VPS or even self-hosting a database yourself. With the cloud solution, the ongoing effort is minimal. There's pretty much nothing for you to actually maintain. The cloud company is doing it, and that's what you're paying them for. But if you're going to be doing it on a VPS, well, now you have to worry about the version, making sure the version is up to date on a regular basis. You have to worry about database backups. You might have to worry about operating system patches. So there's going to be ongoing effort from you to make sure that the system's up and running. And if you're self-hosting, then that adds even more complexity because now you have to worry not just about the versions and the OS patches and the database backups, but also, hardware, whether it has problems, you have to worry about hardware uptime, network uptime, make sure your internet's good. So it's going to be the most expensive operationally out of the 3. And there are operational trade-offs for decisions like how you run your front end. If you decide to go with a server-side rendered solution like Next.js, you have to worry about security. The recent React 2 shell is a great example of that. If you aren't keeping your system up to date, if you aren't making sure you're updating the packages, you might be running a vulnerable version, and without realizing it, your site is now vulnerable to getting hacked because you haven't kept up to date on it. But solutions like static sites or fully bundled single page applications, they're going to be a lot less vulnerable to these kind of security problems and therefore have much less operational costs going forward. The third dimension is what I call the community trade-offs. How much support and extra features are you getting from the online community that surrounds the different technologies you're choosing between? For example, React has a ton of answers on Stack Overflow for any kind of problems you run into, and a quick Google search or even a ChatGPT query will probably get you answers to any other problems you run into. And if you run into some new kind of problem, there are millions of devs that could potentially help you out online. So React would score very highly in this dimension. But if you're considering a newer tech, like let's say Svelte, then you might find that there's less support online. There might be, less Google results if you have to search for something. There might be less documentation. And if you run into some new kind of problem, you might have a harder time finding a solution online about that exact problem, and you might spend more time trying to figure it out on your own. Also in this category is what kind of third-party plugins and libraries exist to extend the functionality of the technology you're choosing. The ability to find and use off-the-shelf solutions to plug into your tech can be a big factor in your decision versus having to build everything yourself from scratch. The fourth dimension for evaluating decisions is the personal trade-offs. This is where your existing skills and the goals for your project become a factor in making your decision. If you're deciding what language to run your stack on, well, what do you already know? What are you good at? If you've never used Ruby on Rails, but you have years of experience with JavaScript, that needs to be a factor in your decision. You also need to have a good idea about the goals of your project. If your goal is to be able to build and ship quickly, then you need to make sure you're picking tech choices that align well with your existing skills so you can move as fast as possible. But if one of your goals is to learn new skills or maybe try out new tech, or even just add one new thing to your tech stack in this project so that, to add a little bit of challenge and make it more fun, then knowing that going into your decision-making process it's good to know so you know why you're making a trade-off of a little bit of speed in order to match what your goals are for the overall project. And finally, it's important to know what you actually enjoy working on. If you hate opening up your IDE because of the tech stack you chose, then you're really not going to get a whole lot done. For instance, for me, I know that I really dislike using Angular, so Angular is never even going to be an option in my decision-making process. If that's somehow on the list of tech choices, I know that that's going to be crossed off very quickly because for my personal goals, I want to avoid Angular. So even if something is hyped up and you don't like it, well, if you're on a solo project, don't feel pressured to use it. There's no reason you need to use that product. And one final piece of advice about this, if you're making multiple decisions at once, like if you're picking your entire tech stack, try not to overload how much is new in your decisions. Keep in mind what other decisions you're making for each of the different pieces. If you end up picking all new tech, new to you tech for every step along the process, you dramatically reduce your chance of success in your project, which makes sense because every step you take, you're going to run into problems, or at the very least, every step is going to be very slow because you have to go and look up how to do things. So try to limit your new tech to one or two things max so you can still learn the new technologies that you're picking, but you're also making sure that you get a successful project at the end of what you're working on. The fifth and last dimension is cost. First, you have to figure out the hard cost, meaning money, of any of the decisions you're considering. Are there any licenses you have to buy? Maybe there's a monthly service fee you have to pay. Maybe there's a cloud service with a free tier, so there's no money there. Or maybe it's completely open source and free. And then you have to weigh that cost against the other categories. The solution you pick might actually cost more over time than the other solutions you're considering, but it might still be the best solution for you depending on what your needs are. For example, if you're trying to decide how to deploy your web application, maybe paying for render.com is worth it to you over a VPS solution because you're going to get the CI/CD, the automatic deploy every time you push to Git that saves you time every time you release code versus having to manually release the code every time you make changes. And for a solo developer, there's one other cost we have to consider, and that is time. Time is the most finite resource any of us have. And so it's critical to consider how the different options allow us to release quicker, build more features, and just get more done. That's actually an interesting dilemma of a brand new bootstrapped solo developer where we have no money coming in, but we also feel like we have so much to do that we have no time. So we feel like we have very limited time. There's never enough time to get done what we want to get done. So there's this feeling like we have to do everything ourselves until we start making money so we could pay someone else to free up some time. But if you can scrape together a little bit of money each month, you can save yourself hours of time to actually work on your application. For example, I mentioned render.com. That's actually like a real example where, if you don't have to worry about building out your production environment on a VPS or self-hosting, worrying about OS patches and installing and all this other stuff. You don't have to worry about every time you roll out a new update to your application, manually deploying, saving all that time for, I think it's $7 a month right now. That's a great example of, a little bit of money giving you back hours of time to work on your application. And I'm not paid by them. I'm not affiliated with them. I just happened to start using them for my current application, watchwith.tv. So I like what I'm using so far. So in my opinion, $7 a month is a great exchange for the time I get back. Anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah, time is a major factor when you're considering costs for the different decisions you're making. Once you've evaluated your options using these 5 dimensions, all that's left is to weigh the pros and cons for each option and see how they stack up. How you weigh each category is going to be unique to your situation, so there's really no one-size-fits-all solution or answer to how to do it. For someone that's prioritizing low cost above all else, then the free or nearly free options are going to come out ahead. Whereas if someone's prioritizing stability and security, then maybe they might be more concerned with the operational and community dimensions. Those are going to have the most weight in their decision-making process. That's why there are so many different options in tech, because different people have different needs and different goals. So remember, the next time you have to make a technological decision, run your different options through these 5 lenses before you commit to a decision. What decisions have you had to make recently? And would these tips have helped? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.